Hello, everyone. I'm Deanna Corby with Deanna Corby Dressage. I'm a dressage trainer, instructor, competition judge, and USDF bronze medalist. Thank you guys so much for joining me. I have my trainer, Eliza Sydnor Romm, with us today, and we are going to be discussing flying changes and how to train them. So, Eliza, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi. I'm Eliza Sydnor Romm, and I'm from Snow Camp, North Carolina, which is a little tiny town in between Greensboro and Chapel Hill. And I have been a dressage trainer since I was 18, and that was a while ago. And so, yeah, I take horses in training. I compete. I start a lot of young horses under saddle, which I still love to do, and then I compete all the way up through the Grand Prix and teach a lot of students and have a couple wonderful assistant trainers that work for me and teach clinics all over the country. And yeah, that's what I do.
Great. And you are hosting a clinic this weekend that I will be participating in, that I'm really excited about the flying changes.
Yes.
What's the plan with that?
So this is the last clinic in a series of clinics that I've done over the winter that are supposed to be fun and informal, just kind of a half day, 9 a.m. to 2, where we have a lecture and watch some videos in the morning so that we delve really deep into exactly what is a flying change, how does it work biomechanically with the horse, how do we train one, how do we ask for one, then watching videos, understanding then a little bit more about tempi changes, and then have a little bit of lunch and chat together, and then have 3 demo horses and riders that are in varying stages. A rider that's learning the changes on a trained horse, a horse that's learning the changes, which will be Deanna's horse, and then a horse and rider that are ready to start working on tempi changes that have mastered the single change. And so, yeah, that's the plan.
Yeah, that sounds great. I'm super excited. So guys, I hope you all will be able to make it to Eliza's clinic. I went to the clinic before her last clinic, yoga riders and, dressage riders and yoga and how it relates. And it was fantastic. So I'm really excited for this clinic. If you guys can make it, the price to audit is what, $50?
$50, yeah, for the whole day, and that includes lunch and all the handouts and everything. Yep.
Yeah, super, super worth it. So if you guys can make it to audit, there are still some spaces available, I think, right?
Yep.
So $50 at Eliza's farm. It's going to be really fun. So anyway, why don't we get this ball rolling? Thank you guys for joining us. Be sure to like this if you would like to see more Facebook Lives like this. If you're interested in learning about dressage and about the different movements or specific topics, be sure to click the like button and feel free to ask any questions. We would love to answer them for you. So let's get started on what exactly a flying change is and what level is it required.
So flying change is just a change from one canter lead over to the other canter lead. So if you're cantering on the left lead, that when they have the moment of suspension in the canter, when all 4 feet are off the ground, that they change their legs and go over to the other lead. And I usually tell people who are first understanding that sort of like skipping that you learned how to do as a little kid. And so the canter goes from left lead with the left foreleg leading that people usually look at over to right lead canter where the right foreleg is leading, or vice versa. So that's just a single flying change. That's first asked for at third level. Third level test 1 is the first time you do a single flying change. And then up into 4th level when they start asking for multiple changes. And then tempi changes, meaning every 4 strides at the end of 4th level, and then on up into Pre-St. George and above, where they ask for more tempi changes.
Yeah. Just so you guys know, I've got a picture on the screen of Eliza in a show on one of her horses. I'm not sure exactly who this is, but she's beautiful. doing a flying change. And you can see sort of the left hind leg and the left front leg are at the highest points kind of in midair, and that horse is in the middle of doing that skip or that flying change. And so the horse in this picture that you see on the screen has gone from the right lead and is in the middle of going to the left lead. And that's why you see the horse just basically on 1 out of 4 feet right now. So that's what the flying change looks like. That's this moment in time. The horse is in the middle of doing the flying change. I know that there are a lot of people watching that are either beginners or more advanced riders. This is all great information for whether you just want to develop your eye or if you are in the middle of training your horse how to do a flying change. But I just wanted to kind of cover all of our bases. So the next question I have for you, Eliza, is, in your opinion, is it possible for all breeds of horses to learn the flying change?
In general, I would say if the horse has a pure canter, meaning a 3-beat canter, as opposed to a gaited horse, then yes, it is theoretically possible. I think pretty much every horse that can canter can do a flying change. Now, the quality of that flying change is going to vary. The ease of how they can do it is going to vary. But when we watch horses in nature, they do flying changes. Now, one of the things that you can look for is whether they naturally do clean flying changes or late flying changes. But yes, I would say any horse that can canter can eventually learn to do a flying change, barring lameness or horrific conformation problems.
Okay, great. And we're going to talk more about a clean flying change in just a minute. But I wanted to ask you next, at what age do you think it is wise to start training your horse how to do a flying change?
This is going to be the first of probably many annoying answers, which is it totally depends on the horse and the rider. But in general, I like to think of a flying change as a very natural movement. Like I just said, horses do them in nature all the time. And so if you're a fairly advanced rider, I like to play around with just a single flying change in a very playful way out in the field on my young horses, say a 4-year-old that is very comfortable cantering already and very safe and at least has a fairly balanced canter, but in a very playful way, more like you think of a jumper rider doing a change, maybe getting up a little bit off their back and just changing direction and seeing what they do. If they do it late, no problem. If they do it clean, great, big pat. If they don't do it, no problem. But I like to just play around with it when they're young so that it's not taboo for them to do a change. Some people say, absolutely they must do super, super solid counter canter before you ever do a flying change. Yeah. And sometimes I think that's a little bit confusing to a horse, that you've worked really hard to tell them, absolutely, you stay in this lead no matter what. And then all of a sudden you're going to tell them, okay, now we do this new movement. Yeah. So I like to play around with it when they're young, but again, truly just playfully, never drilling them, never more than just touching on it every now and then when we're having fun out in the field, just to kind of see what their reaction will be. And then when I start to ask them, again, it totally depends. I have some 5-year-olds whose canters are just very adjustable. You can collect it, you can push it forward. They're very easy to make straight. They're easy to move a little bit sideways. So sure, great, go ahead and ask for a flying change. I have some 8-year-olds who are not capable of any of that. So nope, we got to wait until the canter is more balanced to really truly train it as a trained movement in the arena.
Yeah, I know that when I was talking to you about coming with my horse to work on specifically the flying changes, we were talking about what needs to sort of be checked off the list about what the horse needs to know. So we were talking about the quality of his canter and walk to canter departs, and we were talking about straightness. My horse and I had already done a bit of counter canter, not terribly, a whole lot. So I remember us talking that that was going to, that he was ready to, go with that. So yeah. Anyway, oh, and I just got a comment that maybe you could turn down your speaker or your volume a little bit. You're getting a couple of technical difficulties.
Okay.
All right. So anyway, my next question for you is, how long does it typically take for a horse to become confirmed in the flying change? Like on average, what's your experience?
So I'm going to give another annoying answer of it completely depends on the horse. But I would say, we talked about this also with Roman, and I think generally if the horse has a fairly good canter, fairly well balanced, adjustable, then I would say on average it would take between 1 to 3 months for them to understand a single change. If the rider is an advanced rider that has taught changes before and you're working on that, probably not every day, hopefully, but many days of the week. But again, it's so variable. Horses have such different canters. Some horses pick it up truly like you try it and it's like somebody already taught them. And other horses, it takes a year for them to understand a single flying change. And maybe even then one of the changes is harder than the other or can tend to be late. So that is a super variable answer to that question. But if I had to pin an average for a horse learning a change, I would say around 3 months. But that's a wide spectrum.
Yeah, it all depends on the horse. I just wanted to say hello to Manuela. Thank you for joining us today. Also, hello to Faith Hope, and hello to Nicole and Cam and Judy. Thanks, guys, for tuning in today. We're super excited that you're here. We're really happy to share this information with you, and I really want you guys to ask any questions if you have them. No question is too simple, or feel free to just ask away anything that you are wanting to know. We are eager to help you in any way that we can. Dressage and really riding, learning how to ride means time in the saddle for sure. But a super important part of learning about dressage and learning about horses and learning how to ride is going to be time in the classroom, time looking at videos, time going to seminars like the one Eliza is hosting this weekend, clinics, symposiums, reading articles. It's time out of the saddle, really, that's going to help you truly advance and understand what you're doing in the saddle. Watching is going to be a huge, huge part of learning more about your craft in the saddle. So anyway, next question. What are some typical difficulties that you might experience while training the flying change?
So some typical problems, if you have a more sensitive horse that can tend to get a little bit excited, then they run away from the idea of the flying change since it makes them feel a little bit unbalanced. So sometimes you have, I wouldn't call it full-on bolting, but it's pretty typical to have them get a little strong in the contact and run a little bit in the change.
Yeah, because you are technically putting your leg on, and historically that means giddy up kind of thing. So.
Yep. So with a more sensitive horse, that's not uncommon at all. With sometimes, because again, it's a little bit of an exciting movement for a lot of horses when they're first learning it, that they buck a little bit in the change. And again, as a more advanced trainer, hopefully, you don't punish them for that, because the bucking in the change could, of course, become dangerous, at which point absolutely stop it. But it's also them trying really hard. And so a lot of times if they buck a little bit, they're increasing the moment of suspension by a lot, and they might actually buck and do a clean change. So I try to go with them enough that if they buck a little bit, I tell them, sorry, I tell them, it's okay. You can buck a little bit, and I'm not going to fall off, and I'm not going to get too upset. And then I try to figure out how to tone that down, hopefully, eventually.
Yeah.
Another very common one is just that they do the change late behind, which we can discuss more in depth, meaning they change their front legs and then they change their hind legs. It certainly can go the other way. They change their hind legs first and then they change their front legs, which is not as serious a problem, but it's still an issue to work on. I would say those are probably the most common problems that I run into when teaching the change. And all of them are common. All of them have solutions eventually. So they don't need to terrify you if any of those things happen. I think the one that scares people the most is the bucking, which is actually usually the easiest one to fix, because a horse that will really buck and jump can then learn to do the change usually a little bit easier. A horse with a flatter, slightly more forebeat canter, that is a harder horse to teach to change.
Yeah, so with the bucking and the, getting excited and the possibility of your horse doing a change that is late behind or late in front, it's going to be super important that you are either well qualified to teach your horse this movement or I guess, you get some help, some eyes on the ground. Because it can be, in my experience, and correct me if I'm wrong, kind of difficult to tell if your horse is doing a clean change, meaning they change both front and hind leg at the same time to the new lead, rather than for a moment being disunited. It can be hard to tell if your horse does a clean change or a late change. So really important to have some eyes on the ground at the very least. And to perhaps work steadily with a trainer like Eliza and I did together this past winter.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. It's, if you are lucky enough to have mirrors, you can use that and look in the mirror. If you're good enough to prepare it and then ask for it and look in the mirror at the same time, which is hard. But otherwise, absolutely. I've had many people try to teach their horse the change and be pretty excited to show it to me, only to show me a pretty confirmed late change, at which point I'm like, uh-oh.
Yeah.
Again, not the end of the world. It can be fixed, but much better to try to avoid first confirming a late change and then fixing that.
Yeah, and I know that fixing a late flying change is pretty difficult versus fixing or training it right the first time.
Absolutely.
So I've got a picture on the screen now of our dear Charlotte Dujardin doing a flying change on her horse Allegro, and I just wanted to show you here that this horse is in the middle of going over to the right lead canter. This horse is incredibly uphill though, so his front leg is way high in the air. But I just wanted to show you again what the middle of a flying change looks like when the horse goes from the left lead canter, for instance, and skips in the middle over to the right lead canter, just like this horse is in the picture, Charlotte and Allegro. And obviously, the top horse and rider in the world, they have clean and beautiful and perfect flying changes, as you can see in this picture. So anyway, let's go on to the next question that I have. And remember, guys, if you have any questions, be sure and drop them in the comment section below. Let's see. What are some typical mistakes the horse and rider make when learning the flying change? I know you already talked about the horse getting excited to the leg pressure, and you talked about the horse being late behind. Are there any typical mistakes that the rider makes on their end? And, you want to expand on that a little bit?
Sure. I think the most common mistakes that I see the rider make go sort of to either end of the spectrum, where someone is a little too timid with their aids, and so they try to set the horse up, and then they're a little nervous about the reaction, so they just barely ask with their leg, and the horse gives that reaction of, I don't know if you want me to change or not, so I'm just going to keep doing counter-canter.
Yeah.
Over to the other end of the spectrum, where people get all kinds of crooked and leaning out of the tack and swinging their leg all the way up to the saddle pad and overdoing the aids. Yeah. So usually it falls into kind of one end of that spectrum, and I usually have to tell people either that they need to increase the volume of their aid so that the horse knows that you have the clarity of a little bit louder aid, but still hopefully not a huge movement with your leg, and certainly not a huge movement with your body. And what's really tempting, if you're trying really hard to get a flying change, is to jump up out of the tack and lean the other way into the, if you're in the left lead canter and you want to jump and do a flying change to the right, and then you get all torqued and twisted in your body. And I'm sure people have seen people doing tempi changes where they're moving their body practically more than the horse is doing their legs. And that then gets your weight all displaced and is a big mess. The other common problem is just that the rider's timing is a bit off, that they're a little bit too late with their aid, or sometimes a little bit too early. More often they're a little bit late with their aid, so then the horse is a little bit late with its change or doesn't quite change. Or you can actually, even with a horse that knows changes, if the rider is fairly late in the timing of putting their leg on and their new half halt, you can make a horse that knows a clean change do a late change, which can be super frustrating. But those are probably the most common things I see in the rider.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. We had a question from Angela. Thanks so much for joining us, Angela. She asked, and I should have thought of this to ask you first, but she asked, what are the aids that you use for the flying change?
Yeah. It's a good question. Thank you, Angela. So let's say we're going from left lead canter to right lead canter. So my aids in my body are, if I'm left lead canter, my left is at the girth, my right leg is slightly behind the girth, I'm sitting a little bit into my left seat bone. Then I approach the actual flying change. I try to sit evenly on my two seat bones. I move my new outside leg, meaning my left leg, back, and I give a half halt on my new outside rein, meaning my left rein. And then as they jump and change, my new right seat bone, which is my new inside seat bone, goes forward into the right lead as they make a change. So I always tell people a flying change is just a canter depart within the canter. So you think of what your canter depart aids are that your horse likes, and most typically outside leg back, half halt on the outside rein, inside seat bone. Those are going to be your aids for the flying change. Now, there's some horses that like slightly different aids. Some horses like a little bit different combination, a little different recipe of aids for a canter depart. And so then they would probably like the same thing for the flying change. But that's the most typical set of aids. New outside leg back, half halt on the new outside rein, and then swing through with the new inside hip and inside seat bone of the rider.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I'm really glad that you talked about how the flying change itself is basically just a canter depart. And I know that you and I worked on canter departs from the walk, and we really did a lot of those, because that canter depart from the walk is the feeling of a flying change, you know, riding that moment with purpose and with all of the aids that you were just talking about. I think it's important too, to make sure that when you're asking for a flying change, that you're not just whipping the horse's head around to the new direction that you want to go.
Definitely.
Yeah, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, that, you know, when you get into that sort of habit of just over bending to try and get your horse to change to that new lead, you can certainly lead yourself down a road of late changes behind.
Absolutely, because you're going to block the new inside hind leg. So, yeah, if you really turn the horse too sharply into the direction of the change, or certainly overbend them into the change and have a too strong of a new inside rein, you will often block that inside hind leg and make them change, sometimes only in front, and then they just careen around in the cross canter, or they change in front and then they change behind because they're being blocked on that inside. Yeah, and like you said, the walk to canter, that is probably my biggest prerequisite. I want to know, going back to what does the horse need to know before it does the change, I really want to know that the walk to canter each way is very solid. Plus, it lets me slow everything. It is the same biomechanics that they're going to use for the flying change. It's my same aids. And I can really pick apart, okay, they're on one lead, they are a little too slow from my aid. They're a little stiff. They get really crooked. I can pick those things apart because it's so much slower in walk to canter than in the actual flying change, where everything is coming at you very fast.
Yeah. Manuela said, great explanation. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us, guys. Thanks, Judy, for tuning in, and thank you for your questions. I wanted to put up my one last picture here of Laura Graves doing a beautiful flying change. So in this picture, she is in the middle of going from the right lead to the left lead. You can see that pretty much the horse's left hind leg and left front leg are in midair. The left front leg is higher than the left hind leg because the horse is so beautifully uphill. But I wanted to point this out in this picture. You can see how straight the horse is and pretty much how straight Laura Graves is. And obviously this is a very finished product of a horse. But I think when Eliza was talking about the straightness in the flying change, even trying to get it from the get-go and not swinging your body around, swinging out of the tack and trying to grip the horse's head around to achieve the new lead, I think that's important to keep in mind when you're training the flying change, because eventually, ideally, you want to try and look like that picture.
Yeah.
All right, so the last question I have for you is, if you could pick one thing to avoid doing while teaching your horse to do the flying change, I know we talked about some stuff, but if you could pick the one horrible thing you could pick to avoid doing to your horse when you're teaching the flying change, what would it be most important?
I would say probably to avoid losing your seat as a rider in the canter, losing your connection with your seat bones in the saddle and losing the straightness in your body, like you just talked about. It's very easy to get talked into that, to try to get a flying change from your horse.
Yeah.
And then even when your horse has learned the change, it's hard to stop doing that. So that would be my plea to people, to please not get talked into doing that, which is why, again, you really need help in the beginning, especially of teaching changes, whether that's someone else getting on your horse to do the changes or at least someone from the ground helping you to try to avoid that. And I think my other plea would be that even though I mentioned earlier that I like to play around with doing the changes on a young horse just playfully, occasionally when they're young, that you really wait until the quality of your horse's canter is the best that it can be before you try a flying change. Because if you try a flying change from a flat, slightly four-beat, lethargic, crooked canter, you are setting that horse up to fail. It will not be able to do a flying change. And that doesn't mean it will never be able to do a flying change, but working on the quality of the canter is the most important thing as a prerequisite. And then, like we talked about just a moment ago, working on the walk to canters and making those really solid. But I think that's the other most common thing that I see, is that someone wants help with the flying changes, but their base canter that they're working from is not balanced enough, not active enough, not three-beat enough, not straight enough, not adjustable at all. They have only one speed they can go, and then they are hoping they can go across the diagonal and do a change. And of course, then it doesn't work out well, and then the poor horse, really, you can't blame him for not doing it well.
Yeah, yeah.
And the one other thing I want to say is the other thing I would avoid at all costs is when teaching the changes and they don't go well, no punishment for the horse. If they do a late change, that's fine. You don't need to go crazy and stop and give them a sugar, but there is no need for punishment. You can then go through your checklist of, okay, did I have enough activity? Did I have enough straightness? Did I have enough adjustability? All these things. If they buck a little bit, like I said, no punishment. The only time I would ever think of anything even in the realm of punishment is when I have something truly dangerous, bucking, serious bolting. Usually rearing is not going to happen in a flying change, but something that is truly, truly dangerous to me as the rider. Otherwise, flying changes elicit a lot of anxiety in a lot of horses. So when teaching them, you want to keep it playful and you want to keep it positive, because I've had many horses that learned to do the changes from a lot of anxiety, and then that is a lifelong problem. And so even if they make a mistake, and then especially if you go on to learning tempies and the horse takes over a little bit, I've seen many riders where they'll go across the diagonal, they get 2 flying changes, and then the horse is getting strong and they slam it into the halt and rein back and get angry with it, and then you're creating a big problem. So in learning the changes, no punishment, just regroup, try it again, try to be better for your horse.
Yeah, that's really, really great information. I have one question here, and then we're going to wrap things up from Cam. Thanks so much for tuning in, Cam. Let's see. She asks, or she says, she and her horse are in the phase where the horse understands the change, but the horse doesn't always wait for her aids, and the horse will do them even when she remotely thinks that she's asking. So do you have any advice for her?
Yeah, I think that's a very common stage. I always tell people, in my experience, it usually goes a little something like this. You think you're ready to start working on changes with your horse. You try one for the first time and it works out shockingly well. Then you try to actually start working on it and you have a little bit of problems, and then it gets a little better. Then you get to the phase where they want to do them all the time, with or without you. And then you finally get to a phase where they understand it, they have a little more confidence in it, they'll wait for you, they'll allow you to prepare them, etc. So again, super common, no punishment. My only advice would be when she has not asked the mare to change, but the mare changes anyway, trot and pick up the lead you wanted to be on. Don't do a change back. So if you get a flying change that you didn't want, whether it was clean or not, just trot, regroup, pick up the canter that you wanted to be on and go back to work, and then check in with yourself. were you truly sitting correctly? Because when the horse is learning changes, they do become a little hypersensitive, especially if they're a more sensitive type horse, to you just sitting a little bit over to the outside seat bone. Many of us have had the experience of being still a little bit of a beginner rider and riding a horse that knows changes, and we go down the long side, changes left and right, because we lose our balance and we sit a little bit left and a little bit right, and they say, okay, that's what you told me to do. So whenever I get a change that I didn't want, I try to make sure that I'm really truly sitting into the seat bone of the lead that I want to be on. And then usually I want to go back to working on suppleness a little bit with those horses, because they tend to get a little bit tight and stiff through their whole top line, and then they start flipping off changes that you didn't want. So if I can get into them a little bit better with some lateral suppleness, I can usually keep that at bay.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks so much. Really great question. Thanks, Cam. And thank you so much for explaining. Like we talked about, guys, Eliza is going to be hosting a clinic this Saturday in Snow Camp, North Carolina. It's $50 to audit. It's going to be from 9 to 2, and it's going to be all about flying changes. We're going to have lunch. You need to RSVP with Eliza, but it's going to be a great day of education. I'm going to be there, and I'm super excited. I'm bringing Roman, and there are going to be several other horses more advanced, and great information. So anyway, try and come if you can, and if not, if you live too far away, I'm planning to get some of the clinic on video. So if you subscribe to my YouTube channel, I pinned that in the comments section below, youtube.com/user/dressagedt. If you subscribe to my YouTube channel, I will be sure to post that video when it's ready. I do new videos of horse training tips, rider position tips, and product reviews every Tuesday and Thursday. Also, if you're interested in contacting Eliza for any reason, I posted her website in the comments section. And so I'm sure you have all of your contact information there. Eliza is basically the flying change queen right now, since she has about 800 horses learning flying changes in her program right now. So
I do have a lot of horses learning changes, but I will not take the title of flying change queen.
But anyway, like she said too, she also starts young horses, and she has a really great program in Snow Camp, North Carolina. I can attest to that. So anyway, if you have any other questions, be sure to leave that in the comments section below. We'll try to get to them. If you'd like to contact Eliza directly, you know how. Contact me directly. Please do so, and be sure to like this video if you would like for us to do more of these live interviews on different topics. Throw me out some ideas on different topics. We'd love to do them for you. And anyway, thank you so much, Eliza, for tuning in and for participating in this discussion. Really appreciate all of your expertise and your generosity and your time and sharing that with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was fun.
Yeah, it was. Thanks so much, guys, and good night. Bye.
Bye.